Paul, it's Jobs Day. Let's talk jobs, and not the highfalutin numbers that are big and robust, but on the ground, what is it like for somebody who's looking for a job? What is it like when they're trying to get a pay raise? And to answer some of those questions, let's bring in Harley Lippman, Chief Executive and founder of Genesis10, based in Miami Beach, Florida, and New York. Harley, thank you so much for joining us. So, in light of today's incredible jobs number, at least on the top line, let's dig into wages. Can you give us some feeling of why we're not seeing more of an acceleration in wages?
Well, there is a trend. I mean, wages did go up. It went up about 3%, and I think it's continuing. It's just basically it's a catch-up. So I think wages will continue to rise. And then, as I think you've probably been hearing, everybody's very optimistic about the jobs report, and we are in a very stable and growing economy, and all the fundamentals are good. We don't have any of the bubbles that existed in 2001 or in 2008. The only concern I'd raise is that in the second half of this year, I could see that inflation could go slightly over 2%. So that's a little bit of a contrarian view, if I may say.
So the near-term trends, Harley, are obviously on the employment front, wages front are very solid. Longer term, however, there was a very interesting report that came out at the World Economic Forum that suggested that if you want to keep employed and gainfully employed and at the higher end of employment, there's going to need to be a tremendous amount of reskilling, upskilling, continuous education in order for folks to continue to participate in the economic growth globally. Do you think the U.S. is prepared for such a scenario?
Not at all. It's really stunning when you think about it, how most American companies that have been polled have said they can't even get their products out to market, that they can't deploy their own technologies to move forward because they can't find the people with the right skills. So we're really flat-footed right now. We're really completely unprepared for this. And since you mentioned the World Economic Forum, they calculated that about 75 million people will be displaced worldwide through automation. And that's only in the next few years. That's between this year and 2020. So now, that's the bad news. But the good news is that there'll be probably at least 133 million new roles created. So an example could be the horse and a buggy. When the car came along, a lot of jobs were lost by people who made the buggy and took care of horses. But with the assembly line and with preparing and building and working on parts for cars, more jobs were created. So while a lot of people have early fears, I think overall progress will create more jobs ultimately and a better life for everyone.
So, Harley, Genesis10 is one of the nation's largest IT services and staffing firms. You have a pretty good view into that entire industry. Where is the fastest job gain right now? Like, where are you seeing the most active hiring?
Well, clearly on the IT side, software developers, testers, QA people, people who want to learn about cybersecurity is always going to be hot and big. AI, artificial intelligence, robotics, automation, huge future in that. That's where the jobs are.
So, Harley, given that that's where the growth is, and that perhaps the workforce is not adequately trained for some of these new jobs over the next 10, 15, 20 years, what do you think, industry needs to do to train up this workforce? What kind of incentives do you think are needed to ensure that we have that workforce of the future?
Well, I think it's going to be teamwork all the way around. So the government has to offer the right incentives, tax incentives, which I think they really need to do. And also, I think you need to have probably the pooling of...
I'm sorry, yes. Tax incentives. Why wasn't the tax cut enough to do that?
Well, this would be very specific tax incentives relating to training. So the tax cut didn't address that. But we're dealing with our workforce. And I think that I think you'll need to pool resources. Businesses will need to work together to be able to create all kinds of training programs, both in government and in business, and most importantly, training people while they're in school, so they learn and understand what skills are needed for them to have gainful employment when they graduate.
And those policies, from your perspective, are not there.
Not at all.
Very good. That's
not at all.
That's something that's going to certainly need to be addressed. So Harley Lippman, CEO and founder of Genesis10, joining us on the phone from Miami Beach, I believe.